A thug snatched a glass bottle from a tourist, smashed it against stone, and pressed the jagged edge against the royal guard's throat. He began his countdown. 1, 2... But before he could say 3, the crowd was left in utter shock. Here's what happened. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Also, make sure to check out our second channel, Guard Patrol, linked in the pinned comments, because we upload daily at the same time on both channels. So subscribe to both and never miss a powerful story. The late autumn wind swept across the palace grounds, carrying with it the acrid smell of stale cigarettes and cheap beer, as Marcus, Mad Dog Cooper, shouldered his way through the morning crowd. His leather jacket, adorned with crude patches and metal studs, seemed to absorb what little warmth the weak October sun provided. Traditions? What bloody traditions? His voice cut through the respectful murmur of tourists like a rusted blade. Just a bunch of grown men playing dress-up in it. The smell of last night's alcohol still clung to his breath as he stalked toward the palace gates, his heavy boots leaving scuff marks on the pristine pathway. 2 elderly women clutched their handbags closer as he passed, their eyes widening at the sight of his scarred knuckles and the faded prison tattoos that crept up his neck. A young father quickly guided his children behind him, recognizing the telltale signs of someone looking for trouble. "Look at all of you," Cooper sneered, his London accent thick with contempt. "Standing around, taking pictures, wasting your time." His eyes fixed on the royal guard, standing at attention nearby. The guard's perfect posture and immaculate uniform, representing everything Cooper had come to despise during his 3 stints in Her Majesty's prison service. The morning light caught the guard's brass buttons and ceremonial rifle, the gleam somehow making Cooper's scowl deepen. He spat on the ground, deliberately close to a "please keep off" sign. Time someone showed you all what these toy soldiers really are. An off-duty police officer, enjoying his morning coffee nearby, noticed Cooper's approach and slowly reached for his phone. He'd seen that look before. The coiled tension of someone about to prove a point in the worst possible way. "Today's the day," Cooper announced to no one in particular, his fingers flexing like a boxer preparing for a fight. "Today's the day we expose this whole circus for what it is." He moved closer to the guard's position, each step deliberate, testing the boundaries of the permitted distance. The guard remained motionless, but there was something in his bearing, a subtle readiness, visible only to those who knew what to look for, that spoke of years of real combat experience. Not that Cooper would have recognized such signs. He was too busy playing to his unwilling audience, too focused on his self-appointed mission to notice the warning signs in the guard's perfect stillness. "You lot think this is real?" Cooper's voice rose as he planted himself directly in front of the guard, close enough that his stale breath fogged the brass buttons. "All this ceremony, all this standing about, it's just theatre for the tourists, innit?" A group of schoolchildren on a field trip huddled closer to their teacher, their excited chatter about seeing the palace guards dying into nervous whispers. The teacher, a former military man himself, recognized the building storm in Cooper's stance and quietly began moving his charges towards safer ground. "I've spent time inside," Cooper announced, his voice carrying the harsh edge of someone who'd learned all the wrong lessons from his incarceration. 3 years in Belmarsh, know what that taught me." He circled the guard like a shark, testing its prey. "Taught me that all this authority, all this power you lot pretend to have, it's nothing but fancy dress." The guard remained motionless, but those who looked closely might have noticed a subtle shift in his eyes. The kind of focused awareness that came from years of real combat experience. Each medal on his chest told its own story of service and sacrifice, stories Cooper couldn't begin to comprehend. "What's wrong, soldier boy?" Cooper moved closer, deliberately invading the space that protocol, tradition, and basic human decency should have protected. "Can't speak up for yourself, can't defend all this nonsense you're part of." his scarred knuckles clenched and unclenched, a boxer's habit that spoke of violence barely contained. A young couple who had been taking photos quickly lowered their camera, the woman's hand finding her partner's arm. "We should get someone," she whispered, but her companion shook his head slightly. The off-duty officer was already on his phone, speaking quietly into it while keeping his eyes fixed on the scene. "Let me tell you something about respect," Cooper continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "In the real world, yeah? In places like Belmarsh, respect isn't earned by standing still and playing dress-up. It's taken." He emphasized the last word by jabbing a finger toward the guard's chest, stopping just short of actual contact. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting stark shadows across the palace grounds. Cooper's shadow fell across the guard's polished boots, but like everything else about the thug's display, it failed to make any impression on the soldier's perfect stance. "You think you're something special because of this uniform?" Cooper's voice carried the bitter edge of someone who'd never understood the meaning of service. "Because of these fancy buttons and this toy gun?" He gestured contemptuously at the ceremonial rifle. "I've seen real power, mate, real authority. This?" He waved his hand dismissively at the palace behind them. "This is just a tourist trap, and you're the main attraction." The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, but there was a tension in the air now, like the moment before lightning strikes. Cooper, too caught up in his own performance to notice these subtle warnings, was about to learn the hard way about the difference between authority and power, between ceremony and capability. Cooper's first shove came without warning, his calloused hands connecting with the guard's scarlet tunic. "Come on, then," he snarled, frustration building as the guard absorbed the impact without so much as a flinch. "Show us what you're made of." The guard's stance remained unchanged, each polished button still perfectly aligned, every crease in his uniform exact despite the assault. Years of combat training had taught him something Cooper would never understand. True strength lies not in the ability to strike, but in the discipline to hold firm. "Did you feel that?" Cooper circled again, his movements becoming more agitated. "Or are you too scared to react?" Another shove, harder this time, met the same immovable response. It was like trying to push against a granite wall. The guard's planted feet and perfect posture absorbed each impact, as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze. An elderly man wearing a veteran's pin stepped forward from the growing crowd. "That's enough, lad. You're only embarrassing yourself." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd seen real combat, but Cooper was too far gone in his own rage to hear the warning. "Embarrassing myself?" Cooper barked a harsh laugh, his face reddening with each failed attempt to provoke a response. "Look at him, standing there like some wind-up toy while I—" Another shove, this one aimed at the guard's shoulders, produced the same result. The guard might as well have been carved from stone. The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the spectacle, but maintaining a cautious distance. Parents shielded their children's eyes, tourists lowered their cameras, and several palace security officers could be seen speaking urgently into their radios. But Cooper, lost in his escalating fury, noticed none of this. "You think this makes you strong?" His voice rose with each word as he delivered another ineffective push. "Standing here, taking it like some trained puppet?" The veins in his neck stood out, his prison tattoos distorting with the strain. "Real strength is about hitting back." The guard's eyes remained forward, but there was something in them now. Not fear, not anger, but the patient calculation of a warrior who'd faced far worse than street thugs. Each medal on his chest had been earned in real combat. Each ribbon telling a story of valor that Cooper's petty violence couldn't begin to comprehend. "Look at me when I'm talking to you!" Cooper's hands shot out again, this time attempting to grip the guard's uniform. But even this more aggressive contact failed to disrupt the soldier's stance. It was as if the guard had become one with his position, rooted to the spot by something far stronger than mere physical presence. The veteran who'd spoken earlier shook his head slowly. "He doesn't understand, does he?" he murmured to another onlooker. "That uniform's weathered worse storms than him." Cooper's frustration was reaching its peak. Each failed attempt to provoke a response seemed to feed his rage, like a fire growing with each piece of fuel thrown onto it. His breathing had become ragged, his movements more erratic. The calculated intimidation of a seasoned thug was crumbling, revealing the desperate need to prove something, anything, about his own importance. "This ends now," he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "One way or another, you're going to show these people what you really are." His eyes darted around the courtyard, searching for something that might finally break through the guard's iron discipline. That's when he spotted it. A tourist's half-finished bottle of cola, the glass catching the morning sun like an answer to his prayers. Cooper's movement was sudden, a predator's strike honed by years of street fights. The tourist barely had time to gasp as the glass bottle was snatched from her hand, her startled cry lost in the collective intake of breath from the crowd. The morning sun caught the brown glass as Cooper held it up, examining it like a man who'd just found the key to unlock his purpose. "Let's try something different, shall we?" His voice had changed, dropping to the dangerous purr of someone who'd finally found his advantage. The bottle dangled from his fingers, innocent enough for now, but everyone watching knew what was coming next. Several people reached for their phones to call for help, but Cooper was already moving. "See, there's something you learn inside," he announced, his boots scuffing against the courtyard stones as he approached a nearby wall. "Something about making weapons out of anything." The bottle swung in his grip, catching light with each movement, about how fragile things become really dangerous when they break. The veteran who'd spoken earlier took a step forward, his face grave. "Son, think very carefully about what you're about to do." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen where this path led, but Cooper was beyond hearing reason. The sound of glass shattering against stone cut through the morning air like a gunshot. Several tourists screamed and backed away, their holiday photos forgotten in the face of real danger. Cooper stood there, jagged bottleneck, gripped in his fist, its broken edges glinting with malevolent promise. "Now then," he turned back to the guard, broken glass extended like some twisted scepter. "Let's see how well your training holds up when things get properly serious." Small drops of cola still clung to the jagged edges, looking uncomfortably like blood in the morning light. The guard hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked, but there was a new tension in the air around him, the coiled readiness of a combat veteran recognizing a legitimate threat. His eyes, still fixed forward as protocol demanded, held the focused awareness of someone who'd faced worse weapons in far more dangerous places. "You lot might want to start recording this," Cooper called out to the horrified onlookers, though most had already begun backing away, "because I'm about to show you what happens when we strip away all this ceremony." He moved closer, broken bottle weaving through the air in practiced motions that spoke of previous experience with similar weapons. The off-duty officer, who'd been watching, reached slowly into his jacket, but the veteran caught his arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Watch the guard's eyes." There was something there, a subtle shift, a warrior's calculation that told its own story about what was about to unfold. Cooper closed the distance with the deliberate steps of someone who knew how to use a weapon, his prison yard training evident in every movement. "Still nothing to say?" The broken edges caught the light as he raised the bottle. "No clever words about duty or tradition?" He was close enough now that the guard could smell the stale beer on his breath, mixing with the sweet scent of spilled cola. "Last chance, soldier boy." The jagged glass moved closer to the guard's neck, hovering just inches from the pristine collar of his scarlet tunic. "Show these people what you really are. Show them how quickly all this discipline disappears when real danger comes calling." Time seemed to slow in the courtyard. Parents clutched their children closer. Tourists pressed themselves against the palace walls, and several security officers could be seen running toward the scene, but they were still too far away to prevent what was coming. Nothing? Cooper's voice had taken on an almost maniacal edge. Not even when I do this? The broken bottle pressed closer, a fraction of an inch from the guard's skin. The morning sun caught both the jagged glass and the guard's brass buttons, creating a deadly light show that held the crowd in terrified fascination. The guard remained motionless, but to those who knew what to look for, there were signs. Micro-adjustments in his stance, the almost imperceptible tensing of muscles under his uniform, the slightly deeper focus in his eyes. Like a master martial artist preparing to move, every fibre of his being was ready while appearing completely at rest. Cooper, blind to these warnings, pressed his advantage. "If you won't move," he growled, "maybe we should see what colour a royal guard bleeds." The broken bottle's edge trembled against the guard's collar. Cooper's hand less steady than he'd like, as the reality of his actions began to sink in. The morning had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the ever-present London traffic seemed muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. "You know what I reckon?" Cooper's voice had taken on a fevered quality, higher than before, betraying the first hints of doubt beneath his bravado. "I reckon you're not moving because you're scared." "Yeah, that's it. All that training, all that discipline. It's just fear, dressed up in a fancy uniform." The guard's breathing remained steady, measured, each inhale and exhale perfectly controlled, despite the threat pressed against his throat. His eyes, still fixed forward as protocol demanded, held the calm calculation of someone who'd faced death in far dustier places than this pristine palace courtyard. "Tell me something, soldier," Cooper continued, desperation creeping into his tone as the guard's composure began to unnerve him. "What's going through your head right now? Are you thinking about your precious duty?" The bottle edge pressed slightly harder, though not yet breaking skin. "Or are you wondering if they'll put 'died for tradition' on your headstone?" A drop of cola rolled down the jagged glass, tracking a dark line across the guard's immaculate collar. In that small detail lay the difference between them. While Cooper saw only the threat he was making, the guard was observing everything, calculating angles, timing breaths, waiting for the perfect moment with the patience of a trained warrior. "Here's what's going to happen," Cooper announced, his voice rising again as he fought to maintain control of the situation. "I'm going to count to 3. By then, either you drop this statue act and admit this is all just a show, or—" He let the threat hang in the air, the broken bottle completing his sentence with its deadly promise. The veteran in the crowd had gone very still, recognizing something in the guard's bearing that Cooper, in his manic focus, had missed completely. It was the stillness that came before action, the calm before a storm that had been brewing since the first provocation. 1, Cooper's count began, his voice carrying the false confidence of someone trying to convince himself as much as others. The bottle wavered slightly, his grip adjusting as sweat made the glass slippery. 2. The word came out slower, uncertainty creeping in as the guard's unwavering composure continued to challenge everything Cooper thought he knew about power and fear. The morning sun had reached its full strength now, casting no shadows for either man to hide in. Cooper's lips parted to form 3, but something made him hesitate. Perhaps a finally recognized warning in the guard's stance, or the first real understanding of just how far he'd pushed things. In that moment of hesitation, that fractional lowering of the bottle as doubt crept in, the guard saw his opening. What happened next would demonstrate the difference between theatrical authority and true military discipline, between the threat of violence and the precise application of force, between a thug with a weapon and a warrior with purpose. The guard's movement, when it came, was like lightning contained in human form, a fusion of years of rigorous military training and real combat experience distilled into a single, devastating response. The transition from ceremonial stillness to lethal efficiency happened with such fluid precision that many observers would later struggle to pinpoint the exact moment the guard had shifted from statue to warrior. His right arm swept up in a precise arc, a movement choreographed through countless hours of close combat drills and battlefield necessity. The strike found Cooper's weapon hand with surgical accuracy, targeting the complex network of nerves and tendons just below the wrist, where maximum vulnerability met minimum required force. The guard's white-gloved fingers struck pressure points that transformed Cooper's iron grip on the bottle into helpless weakness, a technique perfected in military training facilities, where the difference between success and failure was measured in millimeters and microseconds. The jagged bottle, which had seemed so threatening moments before, now tumbled from Cooper's nerveless fingers. The sound of breaking glass against the courtyard stones barely registered beneath the collective gasp of the crowd, the sharp, crystalline shatter a punctuation mark in the sudden shift of power. But the guard's response was far from complete. The disarming move flowed seamlessly into a control hold, his grip repositioning with mechanical precision born from muscle memory and battle-tested experience. "What the—" Cooper's voice cracked with surprise, the beginning of his protest transforming into a sharp grunt of pain as the guard executed a textbook joint lock. His white-gloved hand manipulated Cooper's wrist with the careful calculation of someone who understood intimately the architecture of human weakness, using pressure points and leverage to turn the thug's own aggressive energy against him. This wasn't the crude manipulation learned in prison yards or street fights. It was the refined technique taught to elite military units, where efficiency meant survival and precision meant victory. The guard's ceremonial rifle remained perfectly positioned in his left hand, his posture maintaining the dignity of his station even as he neutralized the threat. The stillness that had seemed ceremonial moments before now revealed its true nature. Not the rigid pose of a palace ornament, but the contained power of a trained warrior who understood exactly how much force to apply and precisely where to direct it. Cooper's instinctive attempt to pull away only worsened his predicament. Each movement he made was anticipated and countered, the guard's grip adjusting with microscopic precision to send fresh waves of incapacitating pain shooting up his arm. The thug's face, which had been twisted with cruel intent just moments before, now displayed the dawning realization that he had catastrophically misread his opponent. His prison yard confidence crumbled in the face of real military expertise. "Stand down!" The guard's voice cut through the morning air with the same precision as his physical technique. These two words, delivered with quiet yet unmistakable authority, carried more genuine power than all of Cooper's threats and posturing combined. It was the voice of someone who had commanded men in battle, who understood that true authority came not from volume or violence, but from absolute certainty and controlled strength. The veteran in the crowd nodded in approval, recognizing the economy of motion that marked true military training. "Perfect form," he murmured to no one in particular. "Exactly how they teach it." Cooper's knees began to buckle as the guard applied slightly more pressure to the hold. His attempt at a defiant snarl turned into a grimace of pain. The tables had turned so completely, so efficiently, that the watching crowd barely had time to process the change. "On your knees," the guard instructed, his voice carrying the same measured precision as his physical control. Each syllable was weighted with authority, earned not in prison yards or street corners, but on battlefields where commands meant the difference between life and death. This was the voice that had directed men through combat zones, that had called in air support under heavy fire, that had maintained order in chaos. The same throat that had remained silent through all of Cooper's provocations now resonated with the gravity of every campaign medal on his chest, every firefight survived, every principle defended, and every oath sworn to the crown. It was the voice of someone who had seen enough real combat to understand that true authority never needed to shout. It simply needed to be certain. Cooper's body obeyed before his mind could protest, his knees hitting the courtyard stones with an impact that echoed his own crumbling bravado. The hold the guard maintained looked almost gentle from the outside, but the sweat beading on Cooper's forehead told a different story. Palace security arrived at this point, though their presence seemed almost superfluous. The guard had controlled the situation with the same precision he applied to every aspect of his duty. As they moved to take Cooper into custody, the guard released his hold with exact timing, not a moment too early or too late. The guard's return to his ceremonial position was as smooth as his defensive action had been, his eyes resuming their forward focus, his posture perfect once again. The only evidence of the confrontation was a single drop of cola staining his white glove, that and the profound silence that had fallen over the courtyard as witnesses tried to process what they'd just seen. As security officers secured Cooper's hands behind his back, the broken bottle lay forgotten on the courtyard stones, a testament to how quickly fortunes could change when real skill met hollow threats. Cooper's earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by the sullen silence of someone who'd learned too late about the difference between ceremony and capability. "Assaulting a Queen's guard with a deadly weapon," one officer stated, his voice carrying the professional detachment of someone who'd seen similar lessons taught before. "That's going to be quite a serious charge." The elderly veteran approached the scene, pausing to collect one of his campaign medals that had come loose during his earlier movement. His eyes met the guards for a brief moment, and a wealth of understanding passed between them, one soldier to another across generations of service. "Young man," the veteran addressed Cooper as he was being led away, "that uniform you mocked, it's not just for show. Every button, every crease, every ceremony has been earned through centuries of real service. Today, you learned why we honor it." Cooper said nothing, but his face showed the beginning of understanding, not just about the guard's capabilities, but about the deeper strength that came from discipline, duty, and dedication to something greater than oneself. The guard had resumed his watch, his posture as perfect as it had been before the incident began. The morning sun caught his brass buttons and medals once again, but now the tourists who had witnessed the event saw them differently, not as mere decorations, but as symbols of the true authority and skill that lay beneath the ceremonial surface. The crowd began to disperse. Each passing tourist now moved with a new respect, understanding that behind every ceremonial stance lay the heart of a warrior, ready to uphold the traditions and values they were sworn to protect. The palace grounds settled back into their usual rhythm, but something had changed in the atmosphere. The guard's presence now carried a deeper meaning for those who had witnessed the incident, a living reminder that true authority lay not in threats or violence, but in the quiet strength of discipline and unwavering dedication to duty. What do you think about this encounter between the thug and the royal guard? How would you have handled such a tense situation if you were in the guard's position? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What other aspects of the Royal Guard's training and discipline would you like to learn more about? If you enjoyed this story about duty, discipline, and the true meaning of strength, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Press the bell icon to stay notified about our upcoming videos, showcasing more powerful moments that remind us why these traditions endure. Check out our previous videos about the Royal Guards appearing on your screen right now. Each story offers a unique glimpse into the dedication and prowess of these remarkable servicemen. Remember, true strength isn't measured by the ability to threaten, but by the discipline to know when and how to act.